Thank you very much, Secretary Holmgren. What a great way to kick off our proceedings here. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Will Inboden. I'm the Executive Director of the Clements Center for National Security, a professor at the LBJ School, affiliated with the Strauss Center and the Intelligence Project, et cetera, et cetera. But you're not here to hear from me. What I want to do is call up to the stage now the man who makes all of this possible, who makes the National Security Career Fair that we have going out in the hallway with 25 U.S. government departments and agencies represented and over 300 of our students there, who makes this event with all these speakers here possible too. And that is UT President Jay Hartzell, who has really shown a single-minded devotion to national service, a commitment to all of our centers, and a commitment to making UT the top university in the country on national security. So President Hartzell, please come on up. So. And yes, he is my boss. So, okay. Right, so, all right.
Thanks a lot, Will. And he said the man who makes all this possible, and I was like, who's that going to be? So I had to kind of rally and get my act together. But it's a pleasure to be with you all here today and to see this program. You can't imagine, to me, more of a timely, high-impact program, which is what the university is really trying to do in so many ways. You also can't help but, I think, pause and reflect doing this event so adjacent to September 11th. And you think about what we all went through as a nation and as a world on that date a couple of decades now ago, and you think about the gravity that lends to this event, but I think it also continues to lend a sense of urgency to these topics. And you think about how we've all changed our ways and the way we think and the way we approach national security and international risks, and that is still here today, and it's part of the topic and part of the agenda, and I think it very much needs to be. We also, through that process, stopped taking national security for granted, and it became more acute to us, more personal in so many ways, and that's probably gave rise to the kinds of programs and activities now that you see on our campus, you see on other campuses, and you see interest from our student body into those careers as they come out of here. The Clements Center is a really special gem in the overall university firmament, and it's one of those things that I've become more informed about as I got into this role, and also more proud of, as I learned the great work that Professor Inboden and all of his staff get to do on a daily basis. And they do what we do as a university, teach and do research. But in the case of the Clements Center, it's applied to such an important area as national security. And it's that teaching and research that not only helps shape the way we think and the way we think about the world and our place in it, but also is preparing the next generation of leaders who are going to be trained and prepared and interested and passionate about national security. We've had hundreds of graduates go on to serve from here. They've gone to incredible places such as the CIA, the State Department, the Defense Department, Congress. I've got amazing people in the military, diplomatic posts, a variety of think tanks. When I walked in, Professor Inboden explained that the career fair was going on, and it sounds like we have another 300 or so students out there vying for more of those key roles. And it's gratifying, I think, as the flagship university in the state of Texas to send our graduates out into those careers. I also think as Americans, it should give us all great comfort that so many incredibly bright, talented students want to go and have that kind of an impact in the world. The signals we hear from the recruiters that are here today and over the last several years are clear. That our students are here and they're dedicated to this effort, and they want to bring their talent to bear in this key area. And moreover, they're deeply committed to serving both their state and their country. Those are values that we all, I think, care deeply about, and they're also values that we share with Congressman McCaul. And you think about all the differences that he has made. One of the ways that we've seen it most recently as a university, but also I know the way we'll feel it for Texas, is his leadership spearheading what is now known as the CHIPS Act. And you think about this opportunity we have to shore up this important sector of the economy, to make sure that it's safe and stable, and also continues to be a source of innovation, all in the shadow, as we're talking today, of 9/11. As we all now are aware, chips are in all kinds of things, and probably things that we didn't always appreciate were at risk in terms of our ability to have them and to use them. That risk has been exposed. And those issues around the supply and demand of the chip sector truly endanger or put at risk our national security. So it's important for us to maintain leadership in the semiconductor sector, and by doing so, it's actually a national security issue, but it's also going to be a continued source of economic innovation, of jobs, and of growth. Congressman McCaul has championed Texas's role in this. We're really grateful as a university for what he's done there. And we're blessed not only to have Congressman McCaul, but also Senator Cornyn. And the two of them together on both sides of the House have been just really instrumental in positioning what we believe the state of Texas and this area in Austin in particular to be a leader in that space for decades and decades to come. This effort is something we're calling TIE, which is the Texas Institute for Electronics. And the goal is for us to use this effort to address key commercial and defense needs, but also to enable more advancement in research and development, and in particular in an area of chips that I've now come to appreciate is advanced packaging. I heard that and I was imagining like they put bows on the chips, but what we're really doing is weighing in a space now where it's not the design of the chips per se, where we think the big advances may come, but how you take heterogeneous chips and put them together and make them work harmoniously and quickly to achieve the next state of advance. Our goal as a university, in partnership with a bunch of other great universities, I think we're up to about 14 or 15 other universities partners with us, and over 20 companies so far are engaged in this as well, is to end up with facilities that will drive more innovation. So we're putting our effort into having what we're calling an innovation fab, where we could create bespoke semiconductors so that a company who has something they want to try has a few chips to experiment with before they have the scale to go after the big runs. Another one that we're working on is to have one that's a secure fab for our defense partners so that we can create chips that will feed that in a critical sector of not only the economy, but also from a national security perspective. So we are excited that we can bring UT's, not only its history and its resources and its talent to bear on this. Part of why this is so exciting for us is back to the talent. We've got the talent on the faculty side, certainly have it on the corporate engagement side, but also in the student body. And so part of what is shaping Texas' advantage in this sector is that companies want to be around us and they want to hire our students when they finish. So I want to say thanks to Congressman McCaul. He's been just a tremendous supporter of this effort. He and Senator Cornyn came out with a big kickoff event last semester that we were thrilled to be able to host with him. And this speaks to his advocacy for Texas as a leader in this industry. There are plenty of things that one could read or say about the congressman, but just to make sure it's clear, he's in his 9th term in the 10th district and serves much of the Austin space. So we're grateful that he's not only representing us as a local community, but also as a state in the work that he does. He's the ranking member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. He's a former chairman of the House Committee on Homeland Security. As you all know, is somebody who's incredibly both knowledgeable and passionate about national security. It's a pleasure to welcome him here to campus today. He was here on Saturday. We got to watch some of the game together. My voice is now recovering, but I can also say that he was a great fan for us on Saturday. So with that, please join me in a warm welcome for Congressman McCaul.
All right, well, Congressman, it's always great to have you here.
40 minutes. You said 37.
Oh, okay, so that's right. So anyway, I think the Chinese intelligence has been hacking it. So anyway, so our little clock here to keep us on. Well, Congressman, it's always great to have you back here on the 40 acres. You're obviously a great friend of the university, in addition to being a national leader on foreign policy and national security. We're going to cover a lot of territory here in our Q&A, but at first, as we were first walking in, when we were looking at the career fair out in the hall, and mentioned our 300-some students visiting the recruitment booths. A number of them are in here now to hear from you. Do you have any word, advice, exhortation for UT students who are considering careers in public service, especially national security?
Yeah, I still think public service is a noble profession, and I think you would agree with that, Secretary. And unfortunately, politics is not always easy, but I try to see the bigger picture, and really national security is the most important issue that we deal with, because without that, we have nothing. And so I find it very rewarding, very gratifying. And I always encourage the younger generation. My dad was a World War II bombardier, bombed the Nazis, part of the D-Day air campaign, Operation Overlord. And he always said, follow your passion. Find out what your passion is, and if you do that, you're going to be happy in life. And I think it's the best advice I can give. And I know there's a lot of talent out there. I would just encourage you to get involved. in public service and in this space, because we really need that kind of talent right now in the United States.
Thank you. So turning now to a number of the issues we're gonna cover here. Obviously, as President Hartzell mentioned, as you're very aware, yesterday was the 21st anniversary of the 9/11 attacks, and one way that I, as a professor, sort of track the passage of time is my students' memories of those. 10 years ago was still a vivid memory. A lot of them had been in elementary school or junior high. For those of us who were alive that day, and I was in Washington, D.C. that day, obviously it's something we never forget. Now a lot of students today were born after the attacks or were just infants at the time. But last year, on the 20th anniversary of the attacks, the world was still reeling from the Afghanistan withdrawal, and of course the Taliban's subsequent takeover. And the head of United States Central Command, that's the military combatant command over all the broader Middle Eastern region, including South Asia and Afghanistan, General Kurilla, has said that he's worried that terrorists are reestablishing training camps in Afghanistan. FBI Director Chris Wray has worried about terror plots emanating from Afghanistan to threaten us here. What's your assessment of the Afghanistan withdrawal and the ongoing level of the terrorist threat?
God, I've dedicated most of my professional career, both prior to Congress and in Congress, in the space. I was the chief of counterterrorism and national security for the U.S. Attorney's Office here, and from Austin, San Antonio to El Paso, and the border, and then chairman of Homeland Security Committee, at a time when the rise of ISIS and the caliphate was really at an all-time high, and the briefings that I would get in the classified space were very frightening, for lack of a better word. Very determined to use aircraft like 9/11, and these external operations to kill Americans. About once every month, we got a plot, and the good news is we took down about 95% of it, and we did it through good intelligence and capability to be able to hit the target before the target could hit the United States. And so, and it worked, and we connected the dots, and we got all this information, sharing and intelligence, and that really made a big, big difference. So you only know about the 5% that actually happened, but about 95% we stopped. And that's actually a great testimony to our national security professionals out there. But going forward now, it's not going away. When you have Zawahiri, who was the number 2 guy to bin Laden, the number 1, target for us, staying in the house of Mr. Haqqani, the Haqqani network, where he's the guy that smuggled all the extremists from Pakistan into Afghanistan, who is now, by the way, the Minister of Interior, which is Minister of Security, and he's living in his house. Now, that's a problem. That's Al-Qaeda harboring terrorists. It's the Taliban harboring Al-Qaeda. And so that should get your attention. What I worried about with the evacuation was not so much the decision, although I would have preferred a residual force to maintain stability. 2,500 troops and 6,000 NATO to stabilize Afghanistan and keep Bagram, which was our ISR capability, our eyes and ears on the ground, which we don't have now. It's gone. But it was just really a lack of a plan in general. The intelligence community kept telling us, it was going to happen fast. Once you pull the air power out, air support, it's going to implode. And then we heard the president say it's not going to be like Vietnam with a helicopter off the top of the embassy, but it's exactly what we saw 2 weeks later. So we saw this thing, and the military saw it too, and McKinsey saw it as well. He's a dear friend, and he was on Face the Nation yesterday. And, we all saw it coming, but without an adequate plan. And then you put the Taliban in charge of the airport and put the Taliban in charge of the evacuation. That is a prescription for disaster. And I would argue that's what happened. And that's when you saw the suicide bomber, get through, and you had the service members that were killed by the suicide bomber and 50 injured. Just total chaos at the airport. We left a lot of Americans behind, but even more so when I talk to my special operator friends, we left 100,000 Afghan forces that fought with us, that we promised we would protect them. And it was a trust they had in us. And you know what? We left them behind to the mercy of the Taliban. And you can imagine how bad that situation is, right now. And then finally, the women being left behind. I got 4 busloads of schoolgirls out from the university because it was like, they called it Schindler's List. If you're on the list, you live. And if you're not on the list, you're going to die. And we got them out. But we only got 25% of the women out. And those left behind now are under Sharia law, under the worst conditions that you can imagine. And what I did, lastly, I know I'm talking too long, but lastly, I just worry about, after 20 years, right, was it worth it is a question I get from the veterans. And the spike in suicide rates and PTSD, and then finally, China is the beneficiary here. China is moving in. They're signing contracts with the Afghanistan government to mine their lithium and their rare earth minerals. That I don't know why we weren't doing that with them a long time ago. And like Belt and Road Initiative, they will get access to Bagram. And to me, that's very sad, because now what's the end result of 20 years of everything that we tried to do? Is China's in there raping the rare earth minerals and access to Bagram Air Base.
Well, your mention of China is a good pivot to the next question here, which also builds on President Hartzell's comments on the CHIPS Act. Obviously, if you look at America's rise to global power over the last 75 years, our technological edge played a key role in that. We were talking earlier about how the Reagan military buildup really leveraged American ingenuity as well in that respect. And now today, our military and our intelligence community rely on semiconductor chips for just about every weapon, every device that we're using. But particularly for the most advanced ones, 90% of them are manufactured in Taiwan, which, of course, quick look at the map or the daily headline shows is really vulnerable to aggression from China. So your legislation, the CHIPS Act, to bring advanced semiconductor production back here in the U.S. was recently signed into law. Great bipartisan achievement. Tell us the role that you see technology playing in the U.S.-China competition, and especially how can the United States win that competition?
Well, I mean, technology is everything, and the Chinese have invested $1 trillion in their digital economy, and we have to compete. And we can say, China's bad or whatever. I mean, the people are not bad people. It's the Chinese Communist Party that's the villain here, if you will. But we have to compete. And you know what? We're not. We're losing in Indo-Pacific. We're losing in Africa, the African continent. That's why 20 African countries voted to abstain on the UN Security Resolution on Ukraine, because China has a hold on them through Belt and Road, 140 countries, and including Latin America in our own backyard. And this is the great global competition that we are in today. And chips was, after COVID, we saw these critical supply chains like medical, rare earth mineral, semiconductor. And I was approached when I chaired the China task force by Secretary Pompeo, Wilbur Ross, and National Security Advisor O'Brien about an idea to incentivize these manufacturers to do business in the United States and protect this national security asset. We really hadn't made chips in the United States for a very long time, and we ceded a lot of that to Taiwan, where 90% are being manufactured. Imagine in this new world structure order we're in, where Afghanistan implodes, Putin invades Ukraine. Chairman Xi is looking at Taiwan very closely right now. Imagine if he invaded tomorrow, what that would mean if he controls 90% of the advanced semiconductor manufacturing, these chips. It would put us in a world of hurt. And so the politics is always painful. It was a great idea, I thought, but chips are in everything from your phone to your cars to advanced weapon systems, which I care the most about. And we're going to make them here now. And we're going to protect our national security. It's a generational, transformational piece of legislation that will have probably the greatest impact anything I've ever done up there. Yeah, we were talking about 1987. President Reagan got DARPA to invest in tech in the Austin community, and it became known as Cemetech. And that's why everybody talks about Austin being a tech town. It's because of that. And so CHIPS is kind of like that venture, but on steroids. I mean, we already have Samsung, $250 billion expansion announced. Micron, fingers crossed, in Lockhart, that's going to be another $250 billion expansion. Texas Instruments, Intel, they're going to be in Ohio. We try to get them here. I don't want to go into the local politics. And then but you know, this is going to make trillions of dollars invested here, jobs, but most importantly, protect our national security at the same time. So, you know, in a town that doesn't have a lot of good news coming out of there and a lot of, you know, critics, and I mean, that's really good news for the United States and you know, our national security.
Well, and building on your comments about Taiwan and Taiwan's vulnerability, of course, China's threat of aggression against Taiwan is also a real threat to American interests. And you've been in addition to the key architect of the CHIPS Act, you've been a very vocal proponent of more American military support to Taiwan. But that's where you've also highlighted another vulnerability we have with our defense industrial base. As you know, we're significantly behind in weapons production. We'll get to Ukraine in a second, but part of that's because we're rightly supporting the Ukrainians in their fight against the Russians, but that's been depleting our munition stocks. So what should the U.S. be doing right now to ensure that Taiwan has the tools it needs to deter an attack by China? And how can we get our weapons production ramped up?
Well, we should sell the weapons that I signed off on 3 years ago to Taiwan. Now, the ambassador, every time I see her from Taiwan, says, "Where are my weapons?" And we're not giving, these are not ones we're giving, these are ones we've sold to them. So in my position on Foreign Affairs Committee, there are 4 people that sign off on all foreign military sales, the chair and ranking member of House Foreign Affairs and Senate Foreign Relations. And we signed off on those packages 3 years ago. So remember with Ukraine, I was a big advocate, hey, why don't we get these weapons in like before the invasion to have a deterrent effect? And now we're trying to play catch up, and we'll get to that. Same thing with Taiwan. And we have a backlog of 3 years. You know, going back to chips, though, a lot of it is because we don't have the chips. That's why you can't buy a car so easily today as well. It impacts our weapon systems also. And in Taiwan, we need to get them what they call asymmetric warfare. And we need to guide them because they may not know. They want maybe a lot of Abrams tanks, but when you look at China's arsenal in Taiwan, they need what's called asymmetric. That means really smart weapon systems that will be most effective in that theater of operation. And I'm not fully convinced that Xi will do a military invasion, but it's on his timeline. He will be up for an election in November, and if he wins, which I think he will then become like Chairman Mao. He will be the emperor of the Pacific. And his goal is to take back the South China Sea, and Taiwan's the first to fall. He signed a security agreement with Solomon Islands. And you know, the islands my dad's generation liberated are now under the thumb of the PRC, which is really frightening. I mean, when you look at largest invasion in Europe since World War II, that being Ukraine, and then you look at the Pacific theater, it's almost like these two dictators who've made this unholy alliance in Beijing are trying to redraw the maps after World War II, after my father's generation liberated the Pacific Islands and Europe from the Nazis and Japan. So it's very fascinating to see this. But to answer your question about the weapons, we've got to get more innovative. And I talked to a lot of tech companies here in Austin that can really play a difference. It's about competition. I mean, I love the big defense contractors. You probably have them in this room, and I'm not trying to say anything yet. But it's like a big battleship trying to turn it in a direction. And so what we need is more innovation and competitiveness when it comes to these weapon systems so we can make them faster. You know, like the Switchblade 600 is a great tool for Ukraine, right? It's about this big. It looks pretty awesome, too. It's, got the teeth on it. It's kind of like World War II type plane look, and the blades come out. But it lands with precision with the Javelin. And it's been hugely effective against the Russians. And it's so fast, they can't stop it. That's the kind of weapon systems we need in Ukraine right now. But it's also a good indicator of a company that can build something like that. But again, I said, well, how many of you sold to the federal government? 10. I said, why? Well, we need chips, and we get them from Intel. We can't get the chips. So that's a big part of it, I think, as well.
Well, and one more follow-up then on Taiwan, especially because you mentioned the congressional authorizations for the foreign military sales there. And I think most people in our room may know this, for those of you who don't, because of some complicated quirks in diplomatic arrangements, the American president will never visit Taiwan because we don't have official diplomatic recognition with them. Secretary of State probably wouldn't. And so over the last few decades, the key center of gravity for American support for Taiwan has been in Congress. And of course, there was a recent hullabaloo over Speaker Pelosi's visit there, and I know you lent some strong bipartisan support to that. But tell us a little bit more about the role that Congress has played in bolstering American support for Taiwan, a country which otherwise has very few friends.
Yeah, and thank you. So, the one China policy, Nixon went, the old phrase, Nixon went to China.
Yeah.
We can't, and it was all about Russia, right? It was about how can we leverage against Russia. So Nixon goes to China. It was successful. And that began our relationship with China. And then we had what's called the One China policy, which, remember, Taiwan is where Chiang Kai-shek, when he fled mainland, he went to Taiwan just historically. And so that is still the doctrine of the policy of the United States. And then we have this sort of what's called strategic ambiguity. And I guess that's by design that we're going to be ambiguous about Taiwan. I think we're going through a foreign policy discussion now about, do we really want to be ambiguous now when it comes to our commitment to Taiwan? So we have the Taiwan Assurances Act that passed, I believe it was 1979, which attempt to normalize relations with Taiwan. The president of Taiwan can only stay in the United States, I think, like one night, and then she has to. I had dinner with her in New York, and they have an ambassador, but they can't be in the embassy, and all these crazy rules. But I think we need to start thinking about strategic certainty and not ambiguity when it comes to Taiwan. And I think you're going to see the American people, though, and I have this problem. Why is Ukraine so important, right? $40 billion weapons package, and we got another 11.7 now. I'm going back up to discuss and look at what the weapons are. And people are like, why is that important? And then we have to make the same case for Taiwan. Why is Taiwan so important? And I would argue, if anything, that's 90% of the advanced semiconductor manufacturing capabilities in Taiwan. But beyond that, it's such a strategic, point that opens up to the South China Sea. That the adage weakness invites aggression, going back to my dad's word, Chamberlain and Hitler, appeasement, Reagan, peace through strength. These doctrines always seem to come back. And I think what Putin and Xi saw after Afghanistan was weakness. And it wasn't a question of if, but when. And now, it is when now in Ukraine. And it's going to be relatively soon in Taiwan, I think.
Well, and on Taiwan's strategic location, Chiang Kai-shek famously called Taiwan an unsinkable aircraft carrier. So anyway, so just look at a map, you'll see what he was talking about. So, all right, well, again, this is a good segue to the next question, which you'd already touched on a little bit, but I'd love to hear you elaborate on some more about China's overall influence in the world. So right now, Beijing is investing heavily in countries in Latin America, across Central Asia, in Africa, particularly in critical minerals and ports and other geopolitical choke points, if you will, as all part of the Belt and Road Initiative. But this is not really benign capitalist investment. It's more what you've called and others have called debt trap diplomacy, right? These are very unfavorable terms. Just ask Sri Lanka what they've been going through. And includes pressure on some of these smaller countries to take away their diplomatic recognition of Taiwan as well. So especially in the Western Hemisphere, but feel free to riff on this globally too, what should we be doing to help limit China's influence?
We have to be there. I mean, the State Department knows this. I mean, I meet with the ambassadors like from Africa. Why are you doing business with China? And you know what they say? You're not there. We don't have an alternative. They know that it's probably not in their best interest, but they don't have another choice. And it's predatory lending practices is really what it is. One thing I'd like to change is, for God's sakes, China's not a developing nation anymore that would qualify them for interest-free loans from the World Bank that they can then use to make usurious loans, interest rates on truly developing nations. We have to change that. I mean, that makes no sense to me at all. But they've been very effective in the Indo-Pacific, in Africa, in the continent, and in Latin America. They're in 140 nations. And what they do is simply, they will come and say, we're going to invest in your country, and we'll give you these loans, but with high interest rates, that will put your country in a debt trap. Of course, they don't tell them that, but it happens. And then they control the country, and then they get access to the rare earth minerals. So if you look at Angola, or you look at, in Latin America, specifically all the rare earth minerals, China controls 85% of the global markets on rare earth minerals. So when we talk about batteries, I get Tesla, and they're going to expand in Bastrop, by the way, and they're going to manufacture batteries. Because I said, why are you buying your batteries from China? And you know where they make their batteries in China? In the Xinjiang province, where they commit genocide against the Uyghur Muslims. They use slave labor to make solar panels and batteries. So you know what? My hat's off to Elon Musk. He's gonna expand and build those batteries, right next door in Bastrop, which is the right move. But we developed and passed into law something called the Development Finance Corporation. So it was an attempt to, we've got like Exim Bank, we get USAID, we got some leverage, but this was truly a private sector initiative where companies would make money. There's a return on the investment, but at the same time compete with China in these continents, like the Indo-Pacific and Africa and Latin America. I would argue it has not been, I haven't seen a lot of energy in the last year and a half, or the way it was intended. It has to be, it has to be just green energy, and then there are gender things that they have to comply with now, which was never the intent of Congress. We just wanted to help compete against China in any business. So I think it's what they call a great, it's a great competition now. Russia has shown itself to be not a first-rate power. I think we're all seeing that now. But China is our really long-term biggest foreign adversary, biggest threat to our national security that we're going to have to deal with. And one example, and I'll yield back, look at the hypersonic missile they launched that we don't have. That shocked not only the world, it shocked the Pentagon. When we saw China fire off a hypersonic that went around the world with precision and land with precision that can carry a payload of a nuclear bomb, and we can't stop it. And here's the thing, it's built on the backbone of American technology. And this is what really gets me, going back to, we try to be, I was with James Baker, right? Mm-hmm. God, tell me about your China doctrine. Mm-hmm. Because, we tried to embrace them, bring them in the family of nations, and, Congressman, it didn't work. It didn't work. And now we see that they are truly being an adversary in every way, military and economic. And we got to compete with them. We got to stop selling them this technology that they put in their most advanced weapon systems. Real briefly, in 1997, I'm a young federal prosecutor, Main Justice. I prosecuted the Johnny Chung case. And why I bring that up? Because Johnny was a kind of a shyster guy, but he met with the director of Chinese intelligence and China Aerospace, and they put money in his Hong Kong bank account to then put into the Clinton campaign. And why? Because they wanted to drive the policy. And the policy, they got Clinton off of Taiwan, because he was pro-Taiwan in the beginning. And most importantly for them, dual-use technology. So what do they want? They want to get in the WTO, but they also wanted this dual-use technology, aerospace, satellites from the United States going into China. And it worked. And here we are, we've come a long way since 1997. They've come a long ways. And they now are our biggest rival and greatest competitor. And we got to wake up, and they steal it. That's why we shut down the Houston consulate, where I was a couple days ago. But then we sell it to them. So I want to look at the Export Control Act, if given the majority, a chance to stop this.
And we may come back to that. But because you've mentioned Russia and Ukraine a couple of times, including the Switchblade drone and its tremendous battlefield successes there, and also, of course, the significance of this is the largest interstate war in Europe since World War II, some of the largest land warfare in Europe since World War II. The Biden administration has requested an additional $11.7 billion in emergency funding from Congress to provide more lethal aid and budget support for Ukraine. And you've, of course, been a real leader in the Republican caucus on this so far. Why is continued support for Ukraine in Congress critical? Why shouldn't the American people be willing for our tax dollars to go to this, war in a far-off place?
So we don't have to be there. I mean, that's how I answer it. I mean, we're containing Russian aggression. I have to tell you, we knew about the battle plans well in advance. I would say after Afghanistan, you could see on the satellite imagery the troop buildup in Belarus of the Russian Federation, and we saw it. We saw it. We knew it was going to happen, and that's why I would advocate let's put weapons in before the invasion. The argument was made that's too provocative, and this has been the argument the administration and I've been having, is what is too provocative, right? Well, Stingers are too provocative and Javelins are too provocative. Well, we send them in there all the time now. HIMARS, the long artillery, that's too provocative, or harpoons, anti-ship. And now finally, the administration is getting to this place where they are sending this stuff in. And so I was speaking with the Deputy Secretary of State just 2 days ago, Wendy Sherman, who I get along with really well. And I said, can you send me the list of weapons? Because what we want to be sending in, again, going back to Taiwan and asymmetry, we want to send in these smart weapon systems that Russia can't stop. And if you've been watching this counteroffensive that's taken place over the last couple weeks, it's been very inspiring. I mean, the Ukrainian fighter continues to amaze us. We were told to be over in 4 days, and the whole thing was going to be over, that Putin was going to roll his tanks in, and the whole thing was going to be over. And guess what, man? It didn't happen. And in fact, I mean, we've been shocked by it. I just think it's a moral responsibility as well. When I look at the war crimes being committed, and I see a lot of really ugly video footage of things they're doing. I mean, bombing a maternity hospital, for God's sakes. Civilians raping girls, the Wagner Group, these mercenaries, what they're doing on the ground is unthinkable and unacceptable, and they need to be held accountable. So I think they've got some great momentum. I think we get a good weapons package. It's not easy. It's the will of the American people, right? Vietnam took 20 years, and the will of the American people were like, we don't want to be in that war. We had a similar thing with Iraq. I worry that people will lose their attention on Ukraine and or Taiwan as well. I mean, I took some flack from my own party for leading the $40 billion package on various talk show hosts that I won't mention specifically. Look, Russia was never my friend. I don't know this pro-Putin sentiment or somehow Russia is our great friend. I mean, they were an ally to my dad in World War II, but I grew up in the Cold War, and Russia was always the enemy. And the fight that's taking place right now is a fight for freedom and democracy. And in the epicenter of where World War II took place. And I just think it's absolutely essential we do not allow Putin to redraw the maps of my dad's generation one, and also have the same way of thinking when it comes to China and Taiwan.
So turning to one of the other major threats the United States currently faces, a country we haven't mentioned yet, but certainly need to cover, Iran. So the Biden administration has spent almost a year and a half in indirect talks with Iran in an attempt to broker a revival of the Iran nuclear deal, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action from the Obama administration. Now, if an agreement is reached, Congress, especially your committee, is going to have a vital role to play in the review and oversight process. And a key part of that review involves certifying the deal, and I'm going to read the language from the law, that the deal doesn't jeopardize common defense and security. So would a nuclear deal with Iran be in America's national interest, and how might it impact our standing in the region? And finally, could we trust Iran to actually fulfill any agreement that is potentially signed?
Well, that last point you made is the most salient, and that is, can you trust them? You know, Reagan always said, trust but verify. I don't even know if we can get past the first part of that, and that's trust. And I was in Vienna with the Director General of the IAEA, the atomic agency, and he said, you know, we just found 3 undisclosed sites in Iran with uranium particles, which means they're in violation of. Remember, the agreement's still ongoing with the E3, but in direct violation. And what did Iran do? After the IAEA announced that they had found these sites, Iran went in and took all the surveillance cameras that they had put in to look at the current sites. They basically shut them down. And then they did a cyber attack and took all the investigation computer records that the IAEA had and stole it from them. So I think your last point is the biggest one. Can you trust them? If it's truly a peaceful nuclear energy program, great. But I don't think that's what they're after. I think they're really after a bomb. Now, Wendy Sherman will say, yeah, but if we can just get in and try to, at least have some role of oversight, and I get what she's saying, but you look at the sanctions, and now you're talking about billions of dollars going into their apparatus. They go into their, Shia militias. Basically, their war on terror that's taking place in Syria and Iraq and Lebanon and Yemen. And the sunsets get lifted very quickly, on this deal. It is a scary thought. The Abraham Accord, I was with Jared Kushner the other day, and I said, why do you think they haven't made any progress on the Abraham Accord? That was a big deal. And he said, well, because I told the administration, please don't bring up this Iran deal right out of the box. So guess what's happened? Because they did, the Emirates are backing out. I signed off on all those plane sales to the Emirates, and now they're like, no, we might buy them from China now. And it's having a very damaging effect. The enemy of your enemy is your friend, right? So the enemy in the Middle East is Iran. And I worry about a nuclear arms race that could happen. If we have a nuclear Iran, the Saudis are going to buy a nuclear bomb from Pakistan, and you're going to see an arms race, a nuclear arms race in the Middle East. I can't think of anything more dangerous than that. I think, and General McKenzie, CENTCOM, briefed me on our plan, if they do get it, how we can take it out. Israel has some capacity, but as I talked to the Director General of the IAEA, I think it's got to be the United States and a coalition with our partners and our NATO allies, not standing by ourselves, or not just with Israel, and just make it very clear it's a policy of the United States that a nuclear Iran is not acceptable. And the Ayatollah will understand that. But they only understand strength. When they see weakness, they manipulate it. I don't know if the deal is going to happen, in all honesty, Professor. I mean, Wendy told me that one of the biggest issues right now is Iran wants to, if they do this deal, that we will basically sweep these 3 undisclosed locations under the rug and just pretend like it didn't happen. And she told me, no, we're going to let the IAEA do its job and still investigate that. So that's the biggest sticking point. That and the terror designation on the IRGC, which is a Republican Guard, that's their terror operation, lifting that terror designation. I have to say the president's been pretty strong on that, on not lifting.
Yeah, he's held the line on that.
Yeah.
So, and of course, most recently, these reports of Iran providing drones to Russia, since Russia's own weapons supplies are so depleted. So very revealing of their intentions there. So, all right, well, we're nearly out of time. Just one more question from me before we bring our panel up. Mindful that the future, the November elections is uncertain, and we're not going to get into any political stuff there. But whatever happens in the next Congress, it's clear that you're going to continue to be a leading Republican voice on foreign policy. So in the next Congress, as part of that leadership, what will be some of your priorities, like the main issues that you're going to want to highlight? You had mentioned in passing tightening up export controls to China, for example. So, in whatever your role is. So,
What just the prior question? Do we have any nuclear scientists out there, or anybody that's in that? Okay. I don't know the elements.
Not this guy.
I took chemistry, but so there's uranium that you enrich, and it can be used for energy, but it can also be used to build a bomb. And then there's thorium, but it can be enriched for energy, but it can't be used to build a bomb. And so I mentioned this to Wendy Sherman, hey, why don't we just, you can do your program, but just use thorium. And she said, well, I'm not a nuclear scientist. Let me get back to you on that question. Next Congress, I see a real opportunity to restore our exceptionalism across the world. And one of my biggest, if I become chairman, if we get the majority, I will be, chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee. Homeland was pretty cool. It was ISIS and the Caliphate. But the threats today are really our foreign nation adversaries like Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. That is the really big issue of the day right now, and it's getting more and more dangerous. So I'll be really focused on that. I'll be focused on Belt and Road and competing with China. I'll also be focused on not exporting technology to China that they can use in their advanced weapon systems. I got from the this Department of Commerce Bureau of Industry and Security, they do all the export stuff, and they declined less than 1% of the licenses applied for. And in just a 6-month period, $60 billion going from the United States into Huawei, which is the Chinese, basically their telecom surveillance company, and $40 billion going into SMIC. That's their semiconductor. Why are we doing this?
that's their version of Intel, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, why are we doing this?
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of appetite for this, and I think you're going to see, in addition to the prosecutions, that's more judiciary lane, but why was the China initiative basically dismantled? I mean, espionage is not going away, yet we've seen a real decline in prosecutions. We had 130 indictments after the Houston consulate, and only about 7 charges that have come out under this administration. It's worrisome, because I know from my classified briefings, it hasn't gone away. And this is what they're best at. They're really good at this stuff.
Well, our time is up. Please join me in thanking Congressman McCaul for a fascinating conversation. So,
Thanks so much.
that was awesome.
That was good. It was fun.
So good. So thank you.